Welcome to the Australian Institute of International Affairs. My name is Catherine Garlick, and here with me today is Professor Will Steffen from the Climate Council. Thanks very much for joining us today.
My pleasure, Catherine.
First, I'd like to talk to you about your current work. Could you please tell us more about the Climate Council and your role there as Councillor?
Well, the Climate Council was established in 2013 as a follow-on to the Climate Commission, the earlier government body. But we have exactly the same remit, which is to provide authoritative information on climate change to the Australian public. There's a lot of smoke out there, there's a lot of contentious issues, a lot of people taking sides. Our job is to cut through all that and put the facts on the table. So there's 6 of us councillors, I'm one of the 6, and we cover the range of expertise in climate science, climate impacts, what other countries are doing around the world, in other words, international action, and also what we can do about climate change in terms of economic instruments. We write reports, we do media, we engage the public.
Great. Now, the United Nations Climate Change Conference is only a month away. What can we expect from the meetings?
Well, in my view, the Paris COP meeting is already a success. And that's because of the way this meeting has been set up. Unlike previous meetings, countries are coming in already ahead of time with their proposed targets, their levels of ambition. So we don't need to wrangle about that at the meeting like we did in Copenhagen. So that's one major step forward. But I think there are a couple of really important areas we can expect outcomes from Paris. The first is the so-called Green Climate Fund. And this is a fund that's going to help developing countries, the poorer countries of the world, to deal with the climate change issue, both in terms of adapting to the impacts, which preferentially are hitting some of the poorer countries in the world, as well as mitigation, that is, help in getting their emissions down, getting new energy systems, leapfrogging directly into renewable energy systems, and so on. Now, the wealthy countries of the world have promised large sums of money, and of course, that fund has been established. It hasn't been filled up yet. So we would expect a lot of discussion around that in Paris, and hopefully we'll see some pledges from the wealthy countries to increase the amount of money in that fund. The second point I think people should look for is what's going to happen after Paris. We pretty much know what the outcomes are in terms of targets, timetables, and so on. But I think the important thing is we don't want these set in stone, because as we go through time, countries are becoming more ambitious. They're learning more about what they can do to reduce their emissions. So I think one of the most important things that can come out of Paris is an agreement that at a periodic interval, I would suggest 5 years as a maximum, countries would get together, review what they've pledged now, revise those pledges based on new information. And if we can get those 2 things out of Paris, it's going to be a big success.
And how are these outcomes likely to affect Australia?
Well, right now we sit at the bottom of the developed world in terms of our level of ambition. When you compare us with the European Union, with many of the countries within the EU, with China, with the United States, we're lagging behind. So our targets that we put forward in our submission to the Paris meeting, they're going to be under the microscope when we go there. And other countries are going to say, look, we're lifting our game. You guys need to lift your game more. So I think there is going to be pressure on Australia to revisit what we're putting forward, which is a 26 to 28% reduction on 2005 by the year 2030. And that lags behind what many other countries are doing. So I would expect that Australia is going to be a bit under the spotlight, and hopefully we'll come back from that, rethink, and increase our level of ambition.
Do you see a difference between the approaches of the Abbott and Turnbull governments with regards to climate policy?
Well, not so much in terms of climate policy itself. I think it's a bit early days, Catherine, before we can say that. What we can see already, though, is a change in atmosphere around the issue. It was obviously an extremely contentious, ideologically, highly politicized issue under the Abbott government. Made it difficult for people to talk openly about it. Made it difficult to have considered reflective discussions about it in the public. I think that atmosphere, that somewhat very pervasive atmosphere has now been lifted with the change in leadership of the government, and I think we're now seeing much more open conversation about it. And that's hopefully a prelude to reconsideration of policy, which I think is going to happen further down the track.
Now, Malcolm Turnbull recently said that if Australia was to cease its coal export, that coal-burning countries would simply source their supply from elsewhere. What's your response to that? Well,
I think that that's simplifying the issue a bit. Australia is one of the major exporting countries for coal around the world. I think we're number 2, actually, so we're one of the big ones. If we take that coal off the market, that is going to affect availability and price of coal. and that may make it more difficult for other countries, importing countries, to import coal from elsewhere. So I don't think it's a simple zero-sum game where they're going to go elsewhere. The second point I want to make, and I think this is a really important point, is that this is sending a signal that we need to get out of coal as fast as we can. We need to transition to cleaner fuels, to renewable energy sources, and so on. And when countries who might be thinking about importing our coal see that, well, we may be pulling back, when they see large banks pulling out of coal infrastructure and so on, this is more than just an economic signal. This is a long-term investment signal. So I think it could be a very important signal that we can send to other countries that we're serious about transitioning out of fossil fuels to the point where we're going to restrict and eliminate our export of coal.
Thank you so much for joining us today, Professor.
My pleasure, Catherine.